Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me tonight. Working alone can sound peaceful to some people. Quiet hours, no distractions, no one watching over your shoulder. But those same empty rooms and silent nights can quickly become something else entirely. Because when you are the only one there, sometimes you start to notice things that should not be happening. Footsteps where there should be none, a voice that sounds too close, or the feeling that even when you are alone, you are not really alone. Tonight, we are diving into 3 chilling stories, all from people who worked the late shift, all alone and all experienced something they will never forget. So dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin. In 2017, I worked the overnight shift at a small gas station on the edge of Ridgeway, a quiet town in northern Montana. It was one of those 24-hour stations right off a deserted highway, the kind of place truckers stopped at for coffee, and people on long drives use just to stretch their legs. I was 22 at the time, fresh out of school, trying to save money. The job was easy, but the nights were long. From midnight to 6 a.m., it was just me, the humming fluorescent lights and the low buzz of the coolers in the back. Most nights I might see 3 or 4 customers total. The store was surrounded by miles of open field, and beyond that, nothing but woods. When the wind blew, it made the thin metal roof groan. I usually kept the radio playing softly just to break the silence. One night in November, a snowstorm rolled in. It was around 2:30 a.m. No cars had passed in hours. I was restocking shelves when I heard the sound of tires crunching outside. Headlights swept across the window, then disappeared, but the door never opened. I waited a few minutes, expecting someone to come inside. Nothing. I finally went to the window and looked out. But all I saw were faint tire marks leading toward the woods behind the station, not the road. That was strange, since there was no path back there. I tried to shake it off and went back to counting cigarette cartons. Then a few minutes later, the motion bell above the door dinged. I looked up, but the door was still locked and no one was there. For a moment, I thought maybe I was just tired. I went to check the security monitor behind the counter. The front camera showed the empty parking lot, the faint glow of snow in the lights. The rear camera, though, the one pointed at the dumpsters, showed something else. There was a person standing just at the edge of the camera's range. I could not see much, just a dark shape in a heavy coat, facing the building. They were not moving. I watched for almost a minute. No movement, no face, just standing there. I finally decided to call out, thinking maybe it was someone stranded by the storm. I stepped out the back door a few feet and yelled, "Hey, you need help?" The wind howled. Snow whipped against my jacket. No answer. I took one step forward, and the person suddenly moved. They turned sharply and bolted into the woods. I ran back inside and locked the door. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. For the next hour, nothing happened. Then around 4 a.m., the power flickered. The lights dimmed for a second and all the monitors went black, except one. The rear camera feed came back first, fuzzy and static-filled. And now, that same figure was standing closer to the building, maybe 15 feet away, directly under the flickering light. They were facing the camera. This time, I could make out more detail. Their clothes were soaked and the hood of their coat was down. Their skin looked pale, almost gray, and their eyes reflected the light like an animal's. I picked up the phone to call the police, but before I could dial, the power went out completely. The only sound was the wind. Outside and the soft creak of the sign above the roof, I grabbed the flashlight from under the counter and waited in the dark. After what felt like forever, I heard something, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps in the snow circling the building. They crunched from the back to the side door, then to the front. Each step was steady, unhurried. I crouched behind the counter, trying not to breathe. Then came the sound of something scraping against the glass. A fingertip, tracing along the window near the door. I stayed perfectly still, praying they would just go away. The sound stopped. A moment later, the bell above the door dinged again. Even though it never opened, I nearly jumped out of my skin. When the lights finally flickered back on, everything was normal again. The parking lot was empty, the woods silent. I checked the cameras. The figure was gone. At 6 a.m., my coworker Dave arrived for the morning shift. I told him everything, and we went out to check around the building. In the snow behind the station, we found footprints in a single set, leading from the trees to the back door. But here's the part that still chills me. The prints were deep and clear, until they reached the wall of the building. Then they just stopped. No return trail, no marks going back to the woods. Just one line of footprints ending right beneath the security camera. That was my last week at the Ridgeway station. I quit 2 days later. Sometimes, when I drive past that stretch of highway late at night, I slow down and glance toward the gas station. The lights are still on, humming under the empty sky. And sometimes, if you look long enough into the darkness behind it, it almost looks like someone's still standing there. Story 2, the warehouse security shift. Back in 2014, I worked security for a shipping warehouse just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. It was one of those massive buildings with long, echoing hallways, concrete floors, and endless rows of storage racks. During the day, it was busy. Forklifts buzzing, radios crackling, people yelling across the aisles. But at night, after the last truck left, it was just me, one guard, one flashlight, one ancient security system that beeped every time a door opened. The overnight shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and for the most part, it was boring. My job was to patrol the property every hour, check the loading bays, and monitor the cameras in the tiny office at the front of the building. On my 3rd month there, something started to feel wrong. It began one Friday night around 2 a.m. I was sitting in the office watching the monitors when I noticed movement in one of the camera feeds and a faint blur down by Bay 6. I leaned closer and hit the zoom, expecting maybe a raccoon. But what I saw was a man. He was standing halfway between 2 delivery trucks wearing what looked like a reflective vest, the same kind our workers wore. Except no one else was scheduled to be there. He was facing the building, not moving, just standing there. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out the side door. The air was cool and still, the hum of the security lights buzzing above me. I swept the beam across the lot. Nothing. The trucks were parked and locked, no sign of anyone. When I got back to the office, the figure was gone from the camera. I checked every angle, but he had simply vanished. The next few nights were quiet again. Then on Tuesday, it happened a second time. This time, the figure appeared inside the warehouse. I caught it on camera 12, a tall shadow standing between 2 aisles of metal shelving about 200 feet from my office. I froze watching it. There was no mistaking it. A person standing perfectly still just out of the light's reach. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward that section. The echo of my boots followed me down the empty aisle. When I reached the spot where the figure should have been, there was nothing. No footprints, no noise, just silence. When I turned around to head back, I noticed something strange on the floor. One of the small motion sensors had been ripped from the wall and was lying in the dust. That night, I checked every door and window twice. All locked. 2 nights later, I was in the office when I heard a loud clang from inside the warehouse. Metal hitting metal. It echoed for several seconds. I switched on the intercom mic and said, "Hello? This is security. Who's in the building?" No reply. The noise came again, this time closer, like someone dragging a pipe across the floor. I grabbed my flashlight and went in, scanning each aisle. The beam of light caught the dust floating in the air. Somewhere deep inside the building, I heard the faint shuffle of feet. When I rounded the corner near Bay 3, I saw a shape dart behind a stack of crates. I shouted, "Hey, stop!" and started running. My heart was racing as I turned the corner. There was no one there, only a single glove lying on the floor. When I got back to the office, I checked the monitors again. Camera 12, the same one as before, showed movement. The figure was back, standing right in front of the camera, facing it. But there was something different this time. It looked closer than before. The head tilted slightly, as if it was staring directly into the lens. Then the screen glitched and went black. I called my supervisor, but he did not answer. I waited for sunrise before leaving that morning. When I came back the next night, one of the other guards told me the maintenance crew had checked the system during the day. They found handprints on the inside of the camera housing. That should have been impossible. The cameras were sealed, mounted 10 feet off the ground. After that, things got worse. Every night, the motion detectors went off randomly. Doors would beep like they had been opened, and items in the aisles were found knocked over or moved. I started noticing small details too. Footprints in the dust, faint and bare, leading between shelves. Sometimes I would smell cigarette smoke when I walked into the loading area, even though the warehouse was a smoke-free zone. One night, I decided to record my patrol on my phone. Everything seemed normal until I passed Bay 6 again. On the playback later, right before the clip cut off, there was a whisper, faint but clear. It said my name. That was my last shift. The next week, I quit without giving notice. A few months later, a friend of mine who still worked there told me something that made my blood run cold. The man who used to work security before me, the one I replaced, had gone missing during his shift. They found his patrol belt and flashlight lying on the floor by Bay 6. They never found him. Sometimes I wonder if the figure on those cameras was him, still walking those aisles, still watching the night shift. And maybe if I had stayed one more week, I would have joined him. Story 3. The library after hours. I used to work as a part-time custodian at a small-town library in Oregon. It was quiet, peaceful, and paid just enough to cover rent while I was in college. The job was simple: mop the floors, empty trash cans, and make sure everything was locked up by midnight. Most nights, I actually enjoyed being there alone. The faint smell of old paper and the sound of rain on the roof made it oddly relaxing. But one night, that silence turned into something I will never forget. It started like any other shift. The library closed at 9 p.m., and by 9:30, the staff had gone home. I locked the main doors, grabbed my cleaning cart, and started working through the aisles. The building was shaped like an L, with the long side being the main shelves and reading area, and the short wing leading to a storage room, bathrooms, and an old basement door that was always locked. I had been told never to go down there. Apparently, it had been sealed off for years due to black mold and water damage. Around 10:45, I was sweeping near the reference section when I heard something soft, like the sound of pages turning. It was faint, but it came from one of the far aisles. I figured maybe someone had forgotten to leave, so I called out, "Hello? The library's closed." No answer. The sound stopped for a moment. Then a few seconds later, I heard it again. Pages slowly turning, followed by the faint scrape of a chair moving. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the sound. The overhead lights were dimmed at night, so the aisles looked darker than usual. My shoes echoed softly on the polished floor. When I reached the end of the aisle, I turned my light between the shelves. There was no one there, just rows of books and silence. I took a few steps in and looked around. On one of the tables sat an open book, an old leather-bound novel I did not recognize. The pages were fluttering slightly, like a breeze was hitting them. But the air was still. I felt a chill crawl up my neck. I picked up the book and glanced around again. "All right, who's messing with me?" I said quietly, but my voice sounded strange, too loud in the empty building. Then behind me, a loud thud. I spun around, shining the light down the aisle. A single book had fallen off the shelf and landed face up on the floor. I walked over and picked it up. The title was Whispers of the Attic. I had seen it before. It was one of the few horror books the library carried. I placed it back on the shelf and turned to leave. That's when I noticed something else. Someone had moved one of the ladders, those rolling ladders that attached to the higher shelves. It was now standing at the very end of the aisle, facing the last row of books as if someone had just climbed it. I would have heard it move. My stomach tightened. I walked toward the ladder slowly, scanning the shelves with my flashlight. Halfway there, I froze. The beam of my light caught something, a faint reflection like eyes. But they vanished the second I looked directly at them. I backed away, heart pounding, and hurried toward the front desk. I told myself I was just tired, maybe imagining things. I started locking up early, ready to leave. As I reached for the light switch behind the counter, something made me stop. On the monitor showing the security feed, one camera, the one in the reference aisle, flickered for a second. I watched closely, my finger hovering over the power switch. And that is when I saw it. Someone, Oni or something, is standing on the rolling ladder. A figure, completely still, looking down at the open book on the table. It was tall, thin, and its face. It was hard to see, but it looked blurred, like the camera could not focus on it. Then the screen went black. The power cut out for about 2 seconds. When the lights came back on, the feed was normal again. The aisle was empty. I did not bother to check. I grabbed my things, locked the doors, and left. The next morning, I came in to explain what happened to my supervisor. He said he would review the footage, but when he pulled up the security logs, that camera had gone completely blank from 10:47 to 11:03, just static. He laughed it off, said it was probably a glitch from the storm outside. But before I left, I noticed something on the front desk, that same old book, Whispers of the Attic. It was open to the very last page. And written there in faded ink were the words, "Do not close the library." I left that job 2 days later. Sometimes when I drive by the building at night, I can still see the faint light glowing in the reference section window, long after everyone is gone. And that is when I realized, someone is still reading. Thank you for watching tonight's video. Working alone can sound peaceful, but as you just heard, the silence can hide things we are never meant to see. Whether it is an empty hallway, a voice that should not exist, or something watching from the shadows, there is always a moment when the calm turns into fear. If you have ever worked a late shift, or spent hours alone somewhere that made your skin crawl, share your experience in the comments below. You might find you were not as alone as you thought. Do not forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you do not miss the next set of true horror stories. Until next time, stay safe out there